Narmada River, India. I was born from the sweat of the Hindu Lord Shiva while he was dancing. Or perhaps he was meditating so hard, sweat flowed down his body to become my body. Or was I formed from the tears of Lord Brahma? However I was birthed, I am sacred, second in sanctity only to the river Ganges. I am like a mother and am called Narmada Mai. My name, Narmada, means the giver of joy. Festivals such as the Narmada Jayanti honor me with thousands of oil lamps floated at night on my surface. I am also called Riwa, the leaping one, because as a strong-willed virgin, I move quickly to escape the advances of heavenly princes. The mere sight of my water is said to absolve a person from all their sins, whereas to gain the same grace, one must physically bathe in the Ganges. Every year, hundreds of sadhus, holy people or religious ascetics, and pilgrims begin the arduous circumambulation of my entire body. Dressed in white and carrying their earthly possessions, devotees perform the meritorious act of walking from the Arabian Sea along one side of me all the way to my source, and then return to the sea along my opposite bank, keeping my waters to their right. It is a 2 to 3 year journey of over 1,600 miles. At each small creek or tributary, the pilgrims scoop water into their cups, take a drink, and call out, "Bless Mother Narmada." Along the route, pilgrims are given water, food, and places to rest. The age-old pilgrimage along my banks has been threatened since the 1980s by construction of a series of dams, both small and enormous. The most colossal of these structures, the Sardar Sarovar Dam, is one of the largest in the world. Its reservoir has submerged the path and has displaced over 1 million Adivasi, or original inhabitants of the region, mostly poor indigenous tribal people, whose entire culture and livelihood are at stake. Conflict continues between the Indian government and the courts as to whether these people affected by this dam are adequately resettled and rehabilitated. Many villagers who have been displaced to resettlement sites have not received new land, water, or entitlements. Now I am raped, my sacred waters forced through pipes and turbines, my natural flow halted behind megatons of concrete that plug my bowels and block my flow, so that I can no longer perform one of my primary jobs of transporting sediments and nutrients to the long-term detriment of farmlands and fisheries downstream. The government of India supports the building of 30 large dams, 135 medium dams, and thousands of smaller structures and irrigation projects and related water infrastructure to harness me and my tributaries. The government continually argues that the benefits of hydroelectric power, flood control, and irrigation substantially outweigh the cost in human and environmental disruption. Alternatives to big dams have been developed across India. Local groups have transformed arid land with watershed-based irrigation systems and revegetation projects. Though such efforts have had active participation from residents, they are relatively small in scale, and a more extensive shift in thinking needs to occur in a countrywide approach to water use. A transformation is necessary from both urban communities and agribusiness to bring demand for water into line with its natural availability. How is it that I am worshipped and simultaneously desecrated and degraded? How is it that I am sacred and profane at the same time? Nisqually River, Washington State. The Nisqually tribe has lived beside me for at least 600 generations, or 12,000 years. I am honored to witness their ceremonies and their commitment to me, the salmon, and the natural world. When the first salmon return to spawn, I hear drum beats across my water. Children coated in red ochre and bird down gather with the elders at my edge to praise the fish spirits. The meat of the first salmon is cooked on skewers above fire pits and shared with the whole community. Ceremonially, the fish skeleton is saved intact and given back to my body with its head pointing upstream to ensure the return of salmon year after year. Birthed in Mount Rainier National Park, Washington, from glacier melt on the southern slope of the mountain, I flow 78 miles into the Billy Frank Jr. Nisqually National Wildlife Refuge and on into Puget Sound, a fast and galloping ride from 14,000 feet down to sea level. I leave the glacier as meltwater with a milky cloudiness made from small particles of rock, minerals, and organic matter picked up and carried in my swift current. These days, I only get to flow free for 28 miles before being stopped by the first of two dams. I'm dancing along quite contentedly when bam, dam, I come to an abrupt stop behind a huge curved structure called the Alder Dam, with a height of 285 feet and walls 15 feet thick at the top and 120 feet thick at the base. Since 1945, I have been obliged to plunge down huge pipes called penstocks and turn 2 turbines inside a powerhouse to generate electricity. My backed-up water forms a reservoir. I wish the people swimming and boating on my surface every summer would recognize how constipated and stagnant it feels to be a popular recreational area. This dam, like all dams, causes a large backup of sediment that is no longer available to accumulate at the delta. Often, my needs and the needs of the people who use me as a resource are diametrically opposed. My natural functions are changed, permanently altering and sometimes killing the ecosystems through which I flow. However, nobody asks me what I want, which is to regain my rhythm and my range, and to bring back balance along my entire length. One of my favorite places, located amongst old maples, fir, cedar, and dogwood trees, is called Frank's Landing, named after tribal elder Willie Frank Sr. He and his son, Billy Frank Jr., and their families have lived on these 6 acres since it was purchased in 1919. All through the 1960s and 1970s, the tribe endured repeated harassment because the state of Washington began filing injunctions to curtail Indian fishing rights. As the Nisqually continued to practice their culture and feed their families, state law enforcement officials were continually arresting them. The tribe would stage fish-ins, followed by arrest, convictions, and jail time. Eventually, Billy Frank Jr. and others went to federal court. Frank Jr. was arrested more than 50 times in the struggle, but he kept his eye on the long run, often bringing together former adversaries to preserve me and the fish. The Nisqually tribe's decades of legal battles led to one of the most important Indian laws ever passed. The Bolt decision, known as the 1974 case United States versus Washington, affirms Nisqually off-reservation fishing rights. Overnight, Native Americans, who were 1% of the state population and had been limited to 5% of the fish harvest, now had the right to catch half of the state's steelhead and salmon. Today, the tribe works alongside Washington State as co-managers of the fisheries, and they harvest in accordance with the treaties the U.S. government had signed with the tribes. This case was among the first to help decide an underlying question. To what extent do the tribes, as separate nations within a nation, control their own destinies. Yaqui River, Sonora, Mexico. My struggle as a river is interconnected with the struggle of my people, the Yaqui indigenous community of Mexico, in the Sonoran Desert, as I try to provide the ancestral source of water for drinking, everyday use, irrigation, and ceremonial purposes. Together we have had a long and complex history. A member of the Yaqui Defense Brigade grew up playing in my waters during a time when there was still some flow. His relatives live in several of the 8 remaining Yaqui villages along my northern banks as I move south and empty into the Gulf of California, 28 miles southeast of Guaymas. My water that is destined for Yaqui land is diverted for the cultivating of hybrid wheat, corn, and rice, impregnated with synthetic fertilizers. Utilizing high-tech farming methods, the crop yields have been impressive, but little, if any, of the money made from these fields goes to the tribes, and most of the noxious pesticide runoff is funneled into channels that dump directly into my body. Ugh! It makes me ashamed to tell you this, and for you to hear about what shape I am in these days. A family must wash their clothes in this putrid mess because they have no running water in the village of Torim. And when I slog on to the village of Bakum, I witness poor families forced to purchase drinking water since none is available within the homes. 4 gallons of bottled water cost around 13 or 14 pesos, or about $1 in U.S. currency. 4 gallons is not much water, and with so few pesos coming into the household, this is an extravagant amount of money for a necessity that should be free, and a given right for all people. There are regularly scheduled tribal council meetings about what to do concerning the water situation. Since May 2013, one form of protest has been to maintain a resistance camp and roadblock at Vicum, the tribe's main headquarters, to stop large transport trucks along the Mexico City to Nogales Federal Highway number 15. Because of this action, the Mexican government issued criminal charges and arrest warrants against 2 of the Yaqui leaders. Amnesty International has denounced this action in an open letter, stating that Amnesty fears the charges are a reprisal against their legitimate work on behalf of their people's human rights. In the early 1900s, after a series of conflicts with the Mexican army, numerous remaining Yaqui were arrested and dispersed to plantations in the Yucatan Peninsula. The survivors continued resisting until the late 1920s, when Mexican authorities overcame resistance by employing heavy artillery, and even dropped bombs on the Yaqui villages. The struggle is not over, because land and water rights issues remain contentious to this day. On July 9, 2013, the Zapatista General Command, together with the Mexican Indigenous National Congress, issued a statement of solidarity and support for the Yaqui, condemning the theft of water and the criminalization of their struggle. In December of 2014, a conference titled Pillage of the Water of the Pueblos, New Challenges, took place in Mexico City. Many speakers described how even with all the promises of wells from the government, nothing still has been done to provide clean water to the Yaqui people. There are now sections where I dry up and disappear entirely, with nothing in the riverbed but dust. So the struggle for my survival and that of my people continues.